Every crime hides a story. Every story hides a truth. Welcome to The Watcher, where we uncover the mysteries others look away from. Rachel Green felt the weight of the case pressing down on her as she re-examined the evidence. The discovery of the soda can and the DNA match to Alice Peterson had opened a door she hadn't expected. For years, she had considered the possibility of a random abduction, but now she couldn't shake the idea that the answers were much closer to home. Rachel had been born and raised in Cedar Hollow, and she knew this town inside and out. The tight-knit community, the gossip that was passed over fences like whispered secrets, and the unspoken rules that governed how people behaved. Everyone had a part to play, and everyone, it seemed, had something to hide. Alice Peterson, the woman at the heart of the revelation, was a ghost in the town's history. After her affair with George Miller ended, she disappeared almost as quietly as the Millers themselves. No one questioned her sudden exit. In a town like Cedar Hollow, people often left to find themselves or to escape troubles they didn't want to share. But now, Rachel knew that Alice hadn't just left. She had vanished to cover up the truth of a crime so horrific that it could change the course of the town's history forever. Rachel needed answers, and she wasn't about to stop until she had them. She began by tracking down Alice's old friends and acquaintances, many of whom had quietly dismissed her as a troubled woman after her breakup with George. But Rachel's questioning unearthed surprising details that no one had paid attention to at the time. Alice had never truly given up on George, not even after he'd returned to his family. Her obsession with him had only grown, fueled by jealousy and resentment. She'd written letters, sent gifts, and even appeared uninvited at the Miller family's gatherings. No one had thought much of it. After all, Cedar Hollow was a small town where boundaries were blurred, and personal matters often became communal knowledge. Rachel spoke to a woman named Linda, who had been Alice's closest confidant in the years leading up to the disappearance. Linda, now in her late 50s, sat in the dimly lit living room of her house, the curtains drawn against the late afternoon sun. Her voice trembled as she spoke. Alice never stopped talking about George. Even after he left her, she'd talk about him like he was still hers. I think she loved him, or maybe she was just obsessed. You know, sometimes it felt like she wanted to hurt him. But I never thought she'd do something like this, Linda said, her voice faltering. Do you think she was capable of murder? Rachel asked, leaning forward. Linda paused, her eyes darkening. I don't know. But I do know this. When the Millers disappeared, Alice disappeared too. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She just left just like that. As Rachel delved deeper into Alice's life, she uncovered a darker truth. Alice had been more than just a woman scorned. She had been consumed by rage, not just over George's betrayal, but by the loss of a life she believed was hers by right. Her obsession with George wasn't just about love, it was about control. Alice had lost everything in the aftermath of the affair. Her reputation in Cedar Hollow had been shattered, and her social circle disbanded. She had been left alone, discarded like an object that no longer had value. And in that anger, in that unbearable loneliness, she had plotted something unspeakable. Rachel pieced together Alice's twisted plan. When she learned that Rebecca Miller was planning to leave George, Alice saw her chance. If Rebecca was out of the picture, then George would be hers again. But Rebecca's departure wasn't enough. Alice couldn't bear the thought of George's children taking his attention away from her, and the rage toward the Millers boiled over into something darker than Rachel could have imagined. Rachel studied Alice's past relationships, her interactions with George, and the psychological scars that had built up over the years. Alice's mental state had deteriorated, and Rachel began to suspect that her actions that night had been premeditated, an act of brutal, senseless violence designed to take back what she believed was rightfully hers. It wasn't until Rachel uncovered a shocking set of photographs that the true horror of what had happened to the Millers became clear. Among Alice's personal belongings, Rachel found images that were chilling in their simplicity, photographs of George, Rebecca, Mia, and Lucas. Some of the pictures had been taken at public events, while others were clearly taken without their knowledge. Alice had been watching them for months, maybe even years. The photographs painted a picture of obsession, of a woman who had been silently stalking the Millers long after her affair with George ended. But there was something even more chilling. There was a photo of Lucas Miller, the young boy, alone in the yard, playing with his favorite toy. It was the last picture taken of him before he disappeared. Alice hadn't just murdered the family. She had watched them die. Rachel's heart sank as she began to understand the full scale of the tragedy. The Millers hadn't just been victims of a senseless act of rage. They had been the unwilling participants in Alice Peterson's deranged fantasy of love and control. The entire family had been targeted, not just George. The children were innocent pawns in Alice's warped pursuit of revenge. In the end, it was Alice herself who led Rachel to the truth. Rachel had pieced together everything: Alice's obsession, her motives, the photographs, and the physical evidence. But it wasn't until Alice was found in a small cabin just outside Cedar Hollow that the final puzzle pieces fell into place. Alice had been living under an assumed name, hiding out in a remote location. When Rachel confronted her, Alice didn't deny it. She had been running for years, but the guilt had eaten away at her. In the end, she wanted to be caught. Why did you do it?" Rachel asked, her voice tight with disbelief. Alice's eyes were hollow, her face gaunt from years of hiding. She looked at Rachel, a faint smile curling on her lips. "Because I loved him. I was supposed to have him. But Rebecca, and those children, they got in the way," Alice said, her voice barely a whisper. "They were the ones that took him away from me. And I couldn't live with it. So I took them. All of them." The confession was as much of a relief as it was a tragedy. Rachel's mind raced as she thought about everything the Millers had lost. The life they could have had, the dreams they'd held. It was all gone, consumed by the madness of a woman who had never understood the difference between love and control. As the town of Cedar Hollow mourned the loss of the Miller family, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that the answers had come too late. Justice had been served, but the damage was irreparable. The family was lost to the world forever, and all Rachel could do was try to make sense of it. The town, once so full of life and promise, was now haunted by the tragedy that had unfolded. Cedar Hollow would never be the same. As Rachel stood in the empty Miller house, the weight of the loss pressed heavily on her shoulders. The walls, once filled with laughter and love, were now silent, the memories of the Millers fading with every passing year. The case was solved, but the emotional toll was something that would stay with her forever. In the end, the truth had been uncovered, but it didn't bring the Millers back. It only left Rachel with a deeper understanding of the human capacity for darkness and the heartbreak that often follows. The Miller family would never be forgotten. And neither would Alice Peterson, whose obsession turned to madness, leaving nothing but destruction in her wake.